We mentioned to touch base on the story of the Good Samaritan. Why is it that it was so important that story be in the New Testament to begin with? What's the whole point of it?
Yeah, of course. I think for many of our viewers right now, they're going, what? It means for many people, Jewish people, they hear Samaritan, it's a very good thing. A good Samaritan. A good Samaritan is maybe the name of a hospital that your baby was born in. A good Samaritan is someone who steps forward and helps somebody in a lot of trouble. It's completely positive in our culture. Being a good Samaritan, there are laws passed, Good Samaritan laws that protect people who make an effort to help someone who's in distress and so on. Unless they're very, very well versed in Scripture, unless they're very well versed in Ezra Nehemiah and so on, they have no idea why this is a problem. But as it turns out, the Samaritans were the biggest, which were the most miserable enemies of the Jews who living in the land of Israel. And so what you need to do is, whenever I teach history, this is the hardest thing is, you need to clear your hard drive, reformat your hard drive, and we have to go back 2,000, 2,500, 2,600 years in history to a group that was brought into the land of Israel from another land by the Assyrian Empire in order to replace the 10 northern tribes, because that was a very successful practice of the Assyrian Empire to not just conquer a nation and subjugate it, but rather to remove them from their indigenous place and then take another people, move them somewhere else, so people would lose their attachment to a particular land. So the Samaritans were brought into the land of Israel in the end of the first temple period. I'm not going to go into the long history of it, but it was a disaster. The Samaritans brought such misery to the Jewish people. They were like, it was hell. It was hell. They would take bones. There's a group today of Samaritans still in Israel today, but today you go there because you want to go to the Museum of Natural History, so you want to go to the Bible Museum. So there's 1,000 of them, whatever, and they bring actually a sacrifice on Mount Gerizim. But today people just go and everyone's friendly. But that's not what the Samaritan was. Samaritan was the most hated. They were the ones who tried to block the building of the Second Temple. They were the ones who took pieces of bones, and just threw it into the temple in order to defile it completely. I'm not going to go into why now. You can study about it on your own, but they're the reason why outside of the land of Israel, Jews in diaspora have two Passover Seders, because they shattered our calendar. They were miserable. So understand that when we use the word Samaritan, how would you, it would be the equivalent of someone from Islamic Jihad. I mean, they were just miserable. Now, what happens, if you want to defame and defile a people, if you want people to think badly of others, you don't just say, these people are bad people, but you actually just tell a story about them. And a story that people can relate to. And this is going to be very important to the author of the book of Luke. And this is only found in the book of Luke. In the book of Luke, Luke has to, before we get to the Passion narrative, later on in chapter 23 and 24, but before that, Luke has to set up of how could the Jews be so wicked? Because even though Luke is using the book of Mark constantly, he is changing Mark in order to turn up the heat and to present the Jews as completely culpable for Jesus' crucifixion and actually responsible for crucifying Jesus, and that the responsibility of the Romans and Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Rome, should recede. This is extremely important to Luke. In Mark, the Jews are prodding Pilate to crucify, but Pilate goes along. But this is ambiguous in Mark, but not in Luke. Luke wants to make it clear that Pontius. In fact, in Luke, Pilate says 3 times that Jesus is completely innocent. Completely innocent. We don't find that we don't find that in Mark. So Luke is an improvement of Mark. When I say improvement, meaning that it demonizes the Jews as the ones who are completely culpable for crucifying Jesus. Now, today, the convention is, you need to understand this, the convention is among Christian scholars that people don't walk around going, the Jews killed Jesus in the Western world. I don't know what goes on in some crazy places, and maybe in the Ukraine, God knows what they're saying. But I'm just saying normally, in America and Canada, I'll say that crucifixion was a Roman form of execution. It wasn't the Jews that did it, it was the Romans who did it. That's today, after the Holocaust. This is the way people talk. No one talks anymore. This is not at all the way the church fathers read it, and this is not the way the reformers read it. This is the way no one read it that way. You know why? Because Luther wasn't a bad guy. Luther was right. When Luther accused the Jews of killing Jews, when Calvin said these things, when they all did, all the patristic writings reflected the Jews were completely culpable for Jesus' crucifixion. I mean, we have letters from, for instance, from Melito from the 2nd century that the Jews completely killed their Lord. They killed their Lord. I mean, they all wrote this. And they weren't evil. If any normal person would read the book of Luke and read his passion narrative, and just be honest, if you just read Luke, read the passion narrative of Luke, there's no way in the world you can walk away from that thinking that Pilate was responsible for it, but rather that he was a lackey of the Jews, and the Jews were using their power in order to bring about the greatest injustice. Okay, this is very important. So therefore, in fact, it says in Luke, a very interesting term, if you go to Luke 23, verse 25, how does it end? That after Pilate was saying, but he's innocent, he says, but he delivered Jesus according to their will. According to their will. Who's there, by the way? The Jews. And then what does it say in the next verse? You won't believe it. Most people don't know this. So the next verse says, they led him away, and they took hold of the man, okay? Who are they? Well, what's the antecedent? The antecedent is the Jews. So wrap your brain around it. Let's read it, bro. They just read it. Just take your time, read slowly. Verse 25, read verse 23, 24. Just so you know, I'm not taking anything out of context. As far as Luke just raises it up, the key point is that the Jews will be fully culpable for killing Jesus, and the responsibility of the Romans for Jesus' crucifixion would recede to the point that Pilate is completely exonerated as recognizing Jesus as completely innocent. And actually the Jews are the one who led Jesus away. Because if you read it in the Greek, the antecedent is the verse before, are the Jews. That the Jews are actually the ones that led Jesus away to be crucified. And we'll see that's similar in John. Again, the further you move forward in the 1st century, the greater the culpability of the Jews and the responsibility of Pilate and the Romans in general recedes. You find it also, of course, in Mark as well. It's not like Mark is some, the head of the UJA. I mean, in Mark also you have the Roman centurion who recognized that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, so you have to understand how do you set that up? That means, how do you make that story so believable? I mean, who would do that? Who would go take a person who's innocent even this Gentile, Pontius Pilate, recognizes his intent. Now, we know from history, and we know that Pilate was a wicked, a psychopath. We know this from Roman sources. He wasn't sitting there having conversations with Jesus as we find the Gospels, particularly in John. He wasn't, not all that stuff is nonsense. If you read about Pontius Pilate in the historical records, and there's a lot written on him. I mean, an enormous amount of information we have on this individual. But the key point is, how do you sell a story like that? How do you sell that the Jews would do that? So what you've got to do is you need a setup. You need to do storytelling about what kind of a people are the Jews. And that is the story of the Good Samaritan. Again, you have to completely divorce yourself from convention today, the linguistic convention, with the phrase Good Samaritan. It's a good thing. It's a horrific story. It's a vile blood libel, a smear against the Jews. And then the story we're told. This is, by the way, what's called an L source. So this is a story we'll only find in the book of Luke. The story is like this. There's on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, a man was apprehended and beaten by bandits, and he was stripped, and everything was taken from him, and he's laying there in the road. And the road from Jerusalem to Jericho is, you're going downhill, it's hot, it's sudden. So what happens? What happens next is, along comes a priest, walks by. And there's a guy laying on the side of the road. And what does he do? I'm doing fine. And this is the best of the Jews, the priests. He looks at him and he just keeps walking. Then along comes a Levite, walks by him, walks on the other side of the road, and he lets the man lay there and to perish in the burning sun. And then along comes a member of Hamas. This is like something you expect from the United Nations. So along comes, this is like a story you'd expect to find on David Duke's, website. Along comes the Samaritan. The Samaritans was like the hated people. I mean, not hated because we were racist. Hated, they made our lives miserable. They were, I don't say arch enemy. The Romans were miserable and so on. We had plenty of them, but they were sort of from the inside. So you have to understand, 2,000 years ago, Samaritan conveyed one thing. These were, all I could say is this is the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I don't know what. This is these are bad guys, okay? But what you do is you go, the Samaritan, and he had compassion on him. And what did he do? He took him and he bound up his wounds, and he anointed him with oil and with wine, I guess like an antiseptic and so on. He took him to an inn. He cared for him. He paid the owner of the inn, for him to be able to stay there until the man was finally better. Now, if you read that, if you read that story about the Jews, and not just any Jews, isn't that it didn't say like a Jewish janitor. If you're a janitor, I don't mean anything bad, but they're saying the best of the Jews, the top of the line Jews. Pass them. This is such a blood libel against the Jews. Going back a number of years ago, there was a terrible earthquake in Haiti. Hundreds of thousands died. Who was there first to take care of it from Haiti? Israel, right? Wasn't Israel there first? And they came there with the biggest hospitals, and they were there before the Americans were there. You know how far America is from Haiti? America to Haiti, I don't know, is 100 miles? Well, how far is the flight from Miami to Haiti? It's close. You know how far Haiti is from Israel? 6,000 miles. You know, Israel was setting up hospitals to care for a people. Haiti voted against Israel and everything. Israel didn't care. We're going to take care of them. They took care of a people of another people, of another race, of another religion, they didn't care. The human beings, they created in the image of God. And they, even the broadcast, like the networks that really are not crazy about Israel, they had to admit the Israelis were there taking care of them, caring for them, making sure, delivering little babies. Israel brought in special equipment because they know how to deal with suicide bombers and buildings that collapse in order to find survivors. They were there in Haiti immediately. It's just the opposite of this horrific blood libel against it. This is why Streicher was executed in Nuremberg. Streicher wasn't convicted personally of pulling the trigger against the Jew. Streicher wasn't convicted because he took a Jew and stuffed him into a gas chamber. Streicher was convicted of being the editor of Der Stürmer, which was a Nazi propaganda newspaper that poisoned the European mind, polluted the European mind, and made the Holocaust possible. He was the enabler. And that's exactly what the story of the Good Samaritan is. The story of the Good Samaritan is that the story of the Good Samaritan, the idea is to show the wicked Jew, the Good Samaritan. That's the key of it. And therefore, once you have these types of stories, Matthew will use similar devices. And again, the Gospels are much more powerful than Paul's letters in shaping opinion because they actually tell compelling stories. We can sort of know what it feels like to maybe walk down the street and someone's there with their hand out and they're hungry and they're missing an arm, and do we give them money, not give them money, feed them, not take care of them? And so it's something you can totally relate to, and the Gospels are very effective. It's storytelling. There's not a lot of doctrine in the Gospels, but the Gospels are filled with the storytelling, and that storytelling is what shapes the minds of Christians. So Luther wasn't an evil person. It's not that during the Holocaust, like, Europeans are just genetically different than Japanese who saved us. Why do the Europeans either directly participate in the Holocaust or passively, whatever? Why do they do it? And look at today. The whole EU, all they do is they dream, as their countries are being destroyed, they're dreaming about destroying Israel. Why is it the same characters coming over and over again? Because their minds were polluted with this filth of the picture of the Jew, that to them it really makes sense that Jews go and we just kill Arab babies and eat them for breakfast. I mean, this to them is absolutely normal. I have to share this one thing with you. It's very interesting. I remember as a child, I remember 1968. 1968 in America was a bad time. It was a bad year for America. It was a year that RFK was murdered, but I think the most, whatever, was the year that Dr. Martin Luther King of blessed memory, he was murdered in Memphis. And I love his speeches. If people ask me what's on my MP3 player, so I sometimes when I want a good cry, I listened to his speeches, and he was murdered on April 4th. So one of my favorite speeches is a speech he gave the day before he was murdered. He famously, essentially predicts his own death, that he is standing on the mountain and he is overseeing, but he may not be able to enter the promised land, in the sense that he anticipated that he would not be able to continue the civil rights struggle with everyone else. They would have to continue on after him. But it's very interesting that Dr. King was a very special man, a very beautiful soul, and he had a great love for the Jewish people and love for Israel. He loved Israel. He absolutely, to him, anti-Israel, anti-Semitism. The man loved Israel and loved the Jew. I mean, he was like love. He like exuded love. That was what he was. So it's very interesting, in that speech that he gave, he actually talked about the story of the Good Samaritan. So it's very interesting. So to Dr. King, he could not, look, everything I've shared with you to this point, you could just pick out, I had any Christian commentator on it, and certainly any church father you want, Luther, you want Calvin, Bucer, it's not like this is the opinion of some rabbi that's not fond of the Roman Catholic Church. This is what all the church fathers taught, and this is the plain natural reading of the text. Everybody knows this. So, but of course, Dr. King just had such a deep, profound love for the Jews. I mean, so he couldn't accept. So he had his own homily on this, and in his memory, so he actually describes in that last speech, the speech from, the vision from the mountain, very famous, my favorite. So he could not do this. Like, his mind was so pure that his mind was able to just completely ignore the blood libel that is being presented in Luke 10, and he spins it so totally different. So if you want to know why he was such a beautiful person, what a great loss! Oh, what a great loss! Where is he when we need him? Anyway, so you know how he did it. So he actually, in the speech, he describes, it was on April 3rd, 1968. He was murdered the next day, April 4th. So he describes that he was in Israel, driving with his wife from Jerusalem to Jericho. And by the way, just so you know, Jerusalem is, let's say, 2,400. He does whatever he describes it as being like 2,600 feet above sea level. It's way up there. And Jericho is hundreds of feet below sea level. And the road actually going from Yerushalayim to Jericho is a winding road going down, and you're going through some barren, arid lands. And it's like you could sort of see that. So he describes a conversation he had with his wife as he's taking a ride down to Jericho, and he imagines in his mind the story of the Good Samaritan. But you know how he spins it? Because like his mind was, he had every reason to hate white people, and he had been in jail, he'd seen the horror, but he just couldn't. He's just such a beautiful mind. That's what a beautiful mind is. So he just couldn't. So this is how he did it. He says it beautifully. He said to his wife, it must have been that the priest was going down the road, and he thought that the guy laying on the road was a bandit, making like he needs help. And then if someone would approach him, so then he would get up and kill him. So that's why the priest avoided him. And the Levite avoided him because he was afraid that this person was only acting as though that person's that person's really a bandit, laying there, waiting for someone to come to help, and then go kill the guy and steal everything he has. So, and then the Samaritan only does. But it's so interesting that Dr. King was he was so beautiful that his brain just couldn't process evil. He just couldn't. It just didn't go. It was just, he wouldn't go in there. He was a man of such, we miss him. Where are you, Dr. King? But unfortunately, Dr. King is a special gift to a generation that needed him, desperately needed him, and his loss is so great. His loss is so great because, unfortunately, the civil rights movement did not continue in the way, in his path. It's unfortunate, but please God that things will change and we'll all come to the time when all nations will speak in a pure speech, as the prophet Zephaniah, of blessed memory, speaks. So, yeah, Luke, the story of the Good Samaritan has done so much damage. So many Jews paid with their lives for it. And the story of the Good Samaritan is a story of one that smears the Jews, portrays the Jews as a people who are heartless, who are banal, who have no compassion. And the enemy of the Jews, they're the ones who are the compassionate ones.
You know, in a added thought question, if you want to call it that, several things. Number one, the story that was told in Luke chapter 10 about the Good Samaritan, number one, wasn't it just like a parable anyway, not like it actually happened? But number two, in which case, you know, the reality of the matter is, the Torah does command us to be compassionate. So if it really did happen with a Jew or with a priest or whatever, would they not have definitely tended to the needs? To add another spin to that, could a priest who was, if they were ceremonially clean, could a priest in that situation help this guy, or would he have to find someone else to do it because of the purity rites and things like that?
All right, so I'll answer, I guess, your last question first so I don't forget it. So tending the needs of a sick, injured person that's alive cannot convey any tumah, impurity. That's not possible. In fact, no living person or no living, whether it's a horse, a cow, anything, if it's alive, it cannot be tumah, it cannot be impure in any way. Number one, theoretically, this is sort of just legalisms, but second thing is that theoretically, if a person was dead on the side of a road, so then that person, and no one was there to tend to it, that person has a status of what's called a mace mitzvah, which means a person who has died, and there's a mitzvah to take care of his burial. And the mace mitzvah, even the high priest must, not can, must bury him. So that's number one. So there's no purity and impurity laws here, because when you find, if God forbid, if a person sees a dead body, and in the ancient world, of course, this is a common thing. Person walking through the forest, find someone who died, who was injured, people died of all kinds of things in the ancient world. You know, so you had to take care of the body. And even the high priest, who can't even come into contact with his own mother or father after they pass away, but a dead person who's lying on the side of the road, the high priest makes him, must, it's called a mace mitzvah. A mace mitzvah means it's the mitzvah of caring for the dead, where there's no one else there to take care of them. Every priest has to. So that's of course not the case at all. The parable that's the point of the parable. The parable is to show what it is to be to love your neighbor. That means the context is in Luke. Luke will use the term lawyer a number of times, but the lawyer who is having a conversation with Jesus immediately before the story of the Good Samaritan he's asked what must you do to be saved? So he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, and love your neighbor as yourself. So the point is, who's your neighbor? Who is your neighbor that you have to love? So that's the whole point. So the point of the story is that the Jew, He doesn't care about his neighbor. That means the whole point of it is that the lawyer, which means a judge, a legal scribe, the Greek word there it's only used once in Matthew, but it comes up a number of times in Luke. But the lawyer answers, love your neighbor as you love yourself, which is a central tenet of Judaism. So then Jesus now, I don't believe for 1 second that this conversation happened. This actually occurred. This was designed to cast the Jew in the as ugly as possible. I mean, how are kids racist? Why we see a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old child somewhere in Idaho is racist and hates black men and women? Where did they learn that? Babies aren't racist. They learn it at home. That means the Jews are engaged in racism and hatred, and they could care less about the needs of another, and they are going to, just a few chapters later, as we go into the Passion narrative in Luke 22, 23, 24, we're going to encounter the Jews committing the ultimate crime, and that is killing the Son, murdering the Son of God. So, this is a setup for it, but that's the point. The whole point is the lawyer, meaning the Pharisaic scribe who is very knowledgeable, this is the context, is asked, what do you need, what is the center of Judaism? So he answers in a very straightforward way, which is very widely known. Number one, love God. Deuteronomy 6. And the second thing is, you should love your neighbor. You should love your neighbor as yourself. So he goes, well, who is this neighbor? I said, Jesus then shows them, let me show you how the Jews are unsaved. Because that's all the story is, that if that's the case, you should love your neighbor as yourself. If this is the key to salvation, which it is, then the Jews are unsaved. And the Samaritans are saved because they really love. But the Jews are an unsaved people, an unredeemed people, a corporate Israel. There could be individual Jews who would disciple, but the Jews, the Pharisees, they're a banal people, and they hate and mock everything that is good in the world. And therefore, once you hear a story like that, then of course the Jews can drink the blood of Christian boys, and of course the Israel can go and kill Palestinian babies deliberately and knowingly with full knowledge and understanding. Of course they can do that because of these stories. These stories took people in Austria, in Switzerland, in England, and shaped their minds in how to think of what the Jew is. And that's why they hate the Jews. It's not in the breast milk. And that's why when I'm in Southeast Asia, I don't in Indonesia, it's not a problem. They don't believe this stuff. The Muslims and Jews are in Shanghai, they were saved in the Holocaust because they didn't believe any of this stuff. When Jews were, in these countries, they were fine. But in other countries where they took the story of the Good Samaritan seriously, where they took Luke 23's Passion narrative, where Pilate is insisting that Jesus is innocent 3 times, he's innocent, and the Jews are going are demanding his crucifixion, and he said he delivered Jesus according to their will. That means their will and not Pontius Pilate's will. That means that the Romans are completely exonerated. And then you go, and now as they led him away, they laid hold of Simon of Cyrene. But the key is what's the antecedent? So it's the Jews. The Jews literally are the ones who take Jesus away. I mean, that's it. This is finished. These texts will write the Jewish history and will forever be seared in the minds, in the marrow of the bones of Christians, that the Jews are the enemies of mankind and they are to be destroyed because they are our Unglück, unser Unglück, our misfortune. That's where they got it from. Of course they did.
Unbelievable. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you want to go to Rabbi Singer's website, outreachjudaism.org, to get his 2-volume book set. If you've already got it, buy another set, give the one you've got to someone else, or give the new set. As my wife, she has plenty of notes, and she wouldn't give her copy up for nothing. So we actually have spare sets laying around to give out. And so you'll see here, I actually have one laid up. Let me get the right controller here, just so you can see the awesomeness of these 2 books that's on your screen now. Let's get Biblical Volume 1 and 2. As you can see, I've got mine tagged right here, so nobody can take it. But the cool thing about it is, well, there's plenty of cool things about it, but in this particular scenario, I'm going to show you the front of the book. And as long as we're focusing in here, you can see how the front of the book has like categoried items, and the back, let me get the right page here. I thought I had it marked. There we go. Let's see if you can see that. I'm going to lift it up a little higher so you can actually get a little better view at it. Whoa, shoot. Okay, so as you can see, the very front has plenty of good topics. We're working on a volume 3 now, I hope, one of these days soon. And then the back here will have specific verse references. So no matter whether it's the verse you remember or if it's a topic you know, it's covered in both volumes. Throughout the broadcast, I've been flipping pages, seeing what's in there, what's not. So we definitely, Rabbi, we definitely have cause for another volume coming up really soon. Here's the website, toviasinger.tv, which you can find all of his particular videos, all very well categorized, very clean, very neatly laid out. I'm very envious. And so that's it, outreachjudaism.org. Get the CDs to go with it if you can. I'm telling you, if you haven't tried it yet, or if you have the books and you don't have the CDs, what you should do, and this is not a joke, try this out. If you think that I might not know what I'm talking about, go to his website, go into the audio portion of his website, open your book that you already have to whatever page you want to, whatever title is in there, there is a CD that matches it. Here's the thing, what's in the book is not what's on the CD. What's on the CD is the juicy stuff where Rabbi is telling you what you're fixing to read and giving you more information on this other than what's actually written down. So if you're not doing it that way already, you're really missing out. It's like, well, as Rabbi would coin the term, it's like kissing God through a towel. You really should get, even if you can't afford the CDs, download the modules and listen to them as you study this guy. It'll blow your mind. It's really, really awesome.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ועת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר בתפארה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובר בתפארה והוא עובר והוא יהיה בתפארה לו קול. אזי מלך שמו נקרא. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציא נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל. אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא. והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה. אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציא נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל. אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא. והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה. והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה. והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה. והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה.